Thanks so much for being with us here on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Joy Lim Nakrin here with Chief Investigator Brendan Keefe. Brendan, what an incredible 24 hours it's been. We had that shooting at the mall, Peachtree Center Mall, and then just a short time after, we had the bus hijacking, which really, it terrified several counties around Georgia.
Yeah, there's really a nexus between these two things, is that it affected ordinary people, right? Like people like you and me, people watching this stream. Just imagine you're sitting at the food court and all of a sudden the gunfire erupts.
It's horrible. I'm going to actually show some footage of the scene. Actually, that is footage of the suspect. But, you know, you mentioned the common nexus, and to me, another common nexus here is that the suspects in both of these incidents were convicted felons. In this case, the person that you're looking at right now is the suspect in the Peachtree Center Mall shooting, and that's Jeremy Malone from Morrow, 34 years old, and he had been arrested nearly a dozen times before. And I want to show you the suspect. This is a newly released mugshot, and this is not for the Peachtree Center shooting, but rather this is for the hijacking, the bus hijacking. And this suspect, 39-year-old Joseph Greer of Stone Mountain, is a convicted felon, with 19 prior arrests. So, you know, this is something that obviously is very concerning because both of these individuals had a pattern of illegal activity, both men in their 30s. And how did they get their hands on guns?
Well, it's interesting because we have new information now just this morning that in the bus incident, that suspect obtained the gun from the man he ended up shooting. So according to police, the victim on the bus, who is now dead, who is now deceased, was the one with the gun. And the suspect didn't have the gun, that there was some sort of argument or altercation. The victim, if you will, pulled the gun during that argument, and then the suspect disarmed the victim and shot him with his own gun, killing him, then used the victim's gun to hold the bus driver hostage, essentially hijack the bus, force the driver to take him on that extraordinary police chase through multiple counties, and which is just an amazing incident. But by all accounts, he didn't board the bus with the gun. Initially, we thought, and even the police thought, that we had in both cases two convicted felons who would have been no longer allowed to possess a gun, that it's a felony for a convicted felon to possess a gun. In Georgia, there is one exception. You can get your gun rights back, but that's by the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles. Neither happened in this case. Neither was allowed to possess a gun. Now, what's interesting is the bus suspect is actually charged with possessing a firearm by a convicted felon, also charged with possessing a firearm in the commission of a felony. And that charge still applies, even though he didn't get on the bus with the gun, disarmed the guy who pulled the gun on him. You know, you're the lawyer, I'm not, but you know that use of force, if someone pulls a gun on you, you're allowed to use, especially if you have imminent fear of serious bodily injury or death, a reasonable imminent serious bodily injury or death, you can use deadly force to protect yourself or a third party.
Yeah.
But all of that goes out the window when you then use that gun to hold the bus driver hostage, as this suspect is now accused and at least arrested for those charges. And, you know, those are very serious concerns. In the case of the food court shooting, it sounds as though, according to police, that suspect actually did bring the gun into the food court. Again, both incidents started with an argument between two men. And that led to gunfire. Without the gun present, you don't have gunfire, you just have an argument that may have led to some physical violence but not gunfire. And so obviously there's going to be a lot of scrutiny about where those guns came from. And we don't yet know the victim's name on the bus, but the minute we get that information, we'll find out if the victim should have had a gun or not. Because remember, we are in a constitutional carry state. In Georgia, it is now legal for you to carry a firearm without a permit. You don't need any kind of permit if you would otherwise qualify for that permit. So the convicted felons would not qualify for that permit, and so merely possessing the firearm would have been against the law in Georgia, even with this constitutional carry.
So, you know, as we're looking into all this, I mean, you mentioned the gun possession charges that have now arisen because of the hijacking incident, because the suspect in that case, as you said, obtained the gun. He did it, obviously possessed the gun in the moment that he carried out these alleged crimes. And now we're talking about 13 counts of aggravated assault, 14 counts of kidnapping, 2 gun possession charges, 1 count of hijacking a motor vehicle, 1 count of murder. And it all happened on live television. So, what the criminal justice process looks like for him, that's a whole other question. We heard from Mayor Andre Dickens along with Chief Darren Shearbaum with Atlanta Police, as well as the fire chief a short time ago in a pre-planned summer safety press conference. And, they talked about, and one of the things that Mayor Dickens talked about was guns. And he said, and I'll say the same, I'm sure you'll say the same, no one's here, none of us are here to challenge the Second Amendment, anyone's Second Amendment right to bear arms and to legally carry. But he raised a lot of concerns about unlicensed individuals obtaining guns, and really emphasized, that there's going to be new focus on securing weapons, particularly in cars, and concerned about car break-ins, people breaking into cars basically to obtain weapons, and then the things that happen after that. Also, to me, it sounded like he was putting under the microscope some elements of our criminal justice system, because, again, we're talking about in the mall shooting case, a suspect that had been arrested nearly a dozen times before, and in the bus hijacking case, a suspect with 19 prior arrests. So a lot to work on.
Yeah, I'm going to be going downtown to pull the court records for both of these suspects and also the victim in this case to see if there was any criminal history, because it's, the victim again was involved in this altercation, not prejudging anything related to that. He's the victim of murder at this point, but with the firearm he brought on the bus, he may have brought that firearm on legally. We just don't know right now. You use the term unlicensed. It's really important to point out that there is no licensing structure in Georgia for possession of a firearm. You can walk into a sporting goods store and after a background check, immediately walk out with the firearm. There's no permitting process to purchase a firearm or possess a firearm in Georgia. And now you can legally carry one open on your hip or concealed without a permit if you would otherwise qualify for that permit. So there is, people talk about unlicensed people or unlicensed guns or unregistered guns. There is no gun registry in Georgia either,
and
which is interesting.
And the mayor used that language, unlicensed.
Of course.
And, and I think that just kind of highlights the confusion about the gun laws.
Yeah, it does. And look, I'm a lifelong gun owner, at least as an adult. I was a competition shooter for a couple of years, shooting combat pistol competition.
Wow.
I can tell you right now that in my home, the firearms are locked. I have children in the house, so some people want them accessible should there be a break-in or something to that effect. But I have a very sophisticated locking system for the pistols that I have in my house. And, it's incumbent upon gun owners to have responsibility in that regard. A lot of guns, and we have the data to back this up, a lot of the guns that are used in crimes, as you pointed out, are stolen very often from automobiles. People will keep them in the glove box unlocked. Even locked, someone can break into that pretty easily. We're not talking about a sophisticated lock on a glove box, but very often it's not. Someone breaks into the car, or worse, we see this all the time, someone simply tries car doors in a parking lot of an apartment complex until they find one unlocked.
Yeah.
And then they open the glove box, also unlocked, and they find a firearm in there. And then that firearm is later used in a crime or worse to kill someone. And the way they trace them is fascinating. In that, when you watch some of these crime shows, they're like, oh, well, let's run the serial number on the gun as if there's some central computer database. In fact, it's against federal law for the ATF to keep a database of firearms.
Oh, wow.
So the only way that you can trace a firearm, and it's fascinating the way it's done, is they look at the serial number. Let's say they just find a gun on the scene of a murder. They run the way they run the serial number is they actually go to the manufacturer and say, where did this range of serial numbers go? Often it's to a distributor, and the distributor will say, well, this range went to this particular gun seller. And then they will physically go, sometimes call, but often go, detectives, to the gun store. And the gun store will pull up the ATF form that the person signed when they bought the gun. Then they have to physically go or call the person who purchased the firearm. And a lot of times they say, oh, that gun, I sold that 5 years ago. There's no requirement in Georgia for a private party sale. It's often called the gun show loophole, and it's a misnomer. We're not talking about what happens at a gun show, and most gun show purchases are actually done by a federal firearms license holder and are done with background checks. Because at a gun show, a federal firearms license holder is still required to do a background check. But private party sales at gun shows or online or on the street, I did a story years ago, it was in Ohio, but under very similar gun laws here in Georgia. We bought a police gun off the street from a stranger with no questions asked. That is completely legal in Georgia. There's no requirement you show ID to purchase a gun from a private party. There's no requirement that you get an ID from someone if you're selling it to them. A gun is sold in Georgia between private parties. I'm talking about private individuals who own them and someone who wants to buy them, in the same way a lawnmower would be sold. There's no checks. There's no, to make sure the person is qualified to own the firearm. And you don't even have to have a bill of sale. Now, as a seller, it'd be really smart to get a bill of sale, so when the police do come knocking and say, hey, what happened to that gun you bought? We just found it at a murder scene, that you have a record showing where you sold it. But when they're tracking these firearms, it is a manual process, very much, in 2024. And it's by design, because there is no central register.
Tightening up gun regulation, so to speak. What is the discussion? I mean,
right.
I think that many people would have concerns about, me selling you a gun, how I sell a lawnmower, with no tracking whatsoever required.
Right. Well, it comes down to the current interpretation of the Second Amendment. So there's a really, questionable comma in there, in order for a well-regulated militia, comma. And so there's one interpretation that the intent of the Second Amendment is that only the militia, or sort of the volunteer army, if you will, back in revolutionary times, that's why everyone's allowed to possess a gun, because they're all potential members of this militia. But the current interpretation, and the current interpretation by the U.S. Supreme Court as currently seated, is no, that the Second Amendment says everyone has a right to bear a firearm. And so, as you know, as a lawyer, there's a difference between rights and privileges.
Right.
So driving, for example, is a privilege. The state government can revoke your license because it's a privilege, not a right. There is no amendment in the Constitution for you to own or drive a car. There is an amendment in the Constitution for you to own or possess a firearm. And again, not my interpretation, the interpretation of the current courts and all the way up to SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, is that the Second Amendment is essentially an unalienable right, and because it's codified in the Bill of Rights. That doesn't mean it can't be regulated. So the First Amendment is a great example. Speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, you still can regulate that. So, this is often misused, the sort of, you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater when there's no fire. That's kind of the old standard. It's not really correctly used, but what you can't do is incite a panic or incite a riot with speech. And so there is such a thing as criminal speech, but you do have a right to free speech, and the government can't impinge on that. When it comes to firearms, yes, the Supreme Court's ruled you can have regulations. So back to your original question, what can be done? There are proposals right now to close, again, the gun show loophole we described, because a convicted felon could go to a private party sale, either in the parking lot of a gun show, or they can simply go online. There are many websites. You can literally shop for guns from private parties and then meet them. And there's no regulation of that sale whatsoever in the state of Georgia. So a convicted felon certainly could go, because you have that kind of image, like, of an alley, and someone has a gun and someone has cash, and if a cop looked down that alley, they could pull them. No, there's no reasonable suspicion of a crime, because that transaction is completely legal in Georgia. Is it a reason to ask more questions to make sure there isn't a felon involved or something? Sure. But essentially, a private party sale between two individuals is completely legal. There are efforts to try to close that. The opponents of that, the critics of that, would say, hey, wait a second, the vast majority of these guns they're finding used in crimes are actually stolen firearms. So what it really comes down to is, with, to borrow a line from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. With a right comes a responsibility, right? So these rights in the Bill of Rights mean, hey, yes, you can own a firearm, but you as a gun owner have to keep that firearm safe from children. You have to keep it safe from thieves. And knowing how many of these guns are stolen and then used in crimes, it's really incumbent on every gun owner to practice safety when it comes to keeping the firearm secure, so they aren't victim of theft, and so that someone isn't a victim of murder with their gun.
Yeah, and also I was listening to NPR on the way in, and it refreshed my memory about the Sandy Hook massacre, school massacre. And interesting today that many of the survivors are actually graduating high school.
Right.
And the survivors and including the ones that I heard this morning, frankly, I was driving into work, and we're talking about their frustration with what they call a lack of gun control. And it kind of boils down to what you're talking about, the ease with which people can buy and sell guns. Maybe it's not a back alley, but, Joe Schmo can, sell a gun to his neighbor Bob with no tracking, you know what I mean?
And in that case, it's important to point out that my recollection of the Sandy Hook incident in Newtown, Connecticut, was that his mother, the shooter's mother, had purchased him this firearm. And she purchased it legally and then allowed him to have access to it. And so, the thing there is all the rules were followed. There wasn't some stolen firearm. There wasn't some back alley deal, so to speak. This was a legally purchased AR-15 through the normal system. And in fact, I grew up about 30 minutes from Newtown in Connecticut, and I can tell you Connecticut had some of the strongest gun laws in the country. In fact, Connecticut is a big gun manufacturing state. Colt firearms, Winchester, Marlin, a bunch of rifle and pistol manufacturers. Essentially the modern rifle was invented in Connecticut. Eli Whitney invented interchangeable parts, so they weren't one-off guns. But they always had strong gun permitting processes. In fact, my first pistol carry permit was issued by the police chief in Hartford. I can tell you they're really hard to come by, and they've since strengthened the laws there. But yeah, so some people would argue, hey, look, even in states that have these strong gun control measures, there are still people intent on committing crimes who are going to get access to firearms. At the end of the day, even if you outlawed guns nationwide, right now, you have more guns than there are people in the United States. And that is why people who are opposing gun control don't want a registry, because if you outlaw guns, that gives you a list of people to go collect them from.
And here's the thing, and we talk about this, Brendan, we've had conversations, there's a difference between criminal law and civil law.
Right.
And, sometimes when we're talking about, for instance, with free speech, you can say whatever you want. But there are also repercussions. I mean, you talked about, the criminal repercussions if you're basically inciting violence, but also in the civil world. If you're defaming someone, you can be sued, right? We saw that with Johnny Depp and numerous other cases. And in the world of kind of gun control, what we saw, for instance, with Sandy Hook, was a lawsuit against Remington, the maker of the gun used in the Sandy Hook massacre, and they actually ended up settling the lawsuit. Right. The gun company, ended up settling for $73 million against that was a lawsuit against the maker of the rifle, Remington. So, maybe that is kind of the realm where some of this gets sorted out, where there are lawsuits against gun makers or gun sellers for things that happen with these guns.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. But there's also other instances here. I mean, yes, these were the tools of destruction that were used in this particular case, that they used firearms. And if you take the firearms out of the equation, you just have a fight between two individuals on the bus or a fight between two individuals in the food court. So the gun control issue is certainly part of it. But then there's the issue of, how do you keep your family safe? How do you, when you're going to the food court, we've all been to that food court. In fact, whenever there's a convention in town, that's the food court everybody goes to because it's connected to all the downtown hotels. So I've sat in that very food court and eaten lunch. The only reason I wasn't involved in a shooting was simply timing. I was in the wrong place at the right time, and that's why I wasn't subject to being under gunfire yesterday. But the same thing with the bus. I mean, we've all ridden a bus. We've all taken public transit. And there's that balance of security and freedom. And this is I was in New York after 9/11 when there were random searches at subway stations. They still do them. But I will tell you that I'd walk down, see that there was a line where the NYPD was searching backpacks. And even though I was willing to submit to that, warrantless search in order to get on the the subway, it was actually easier for me to walk a few blocks to the next subway station where there was no search. So obviously the terrorist is going to do the same thing. They're going to see the police and go to a different subway station. Hardening the target makes perfect sense, but you can't put a cop on every bus.
Right.
In the case of, and this is an important point, is in the case of the food court shooting, there was an off-duty police officer there from the APD, from the Atlanta Police Department, working that extra job, and that was a big deal because he was able to, and all the evidence points this way. This is not me opining or editorializing. All of the evidence points to that officer neutralized a threat that could have been a much more serious shooting. We already know people were shot. Many more could have been shot if the officer didn't take out that suspect, that gunman, while the gunman was actively shooting. And so, we might have had a much more serious tragedy on our hands at that food court than we did yesterday because a police officer was present. But you can't put a cop on every bus.
Right.
So what do? There's the whole good guy with a gun argument. Well, that's another rabbit hole that we don't necessarily need to go down.
The whole thing, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
But then how do the responding police know who's the good guy when they show up? And this is part of the problem. There have been many, or at least a number of Good Samaritans with a firearm who've been taken out by police who think they're the gunman.
It does happen. Brendan, so we've got some new information I want to share with our viewers, and this is quite stunning, actually. What we've learned is that we actually obtained an interview with the alleged bus hijacker, and we did this at the scene of the food court shooting. This is what
Wow.
I'm learning from
I did
our
not know
own
this.
staff.
That's amazing.
And neither did I. We're just learning this. We're sorting through interviews internally that we took at the scene of the food court shooting, and we have come upon an interview that appears to be the suspect in the hijacking. 39-year-old Joseph Greer of Stone Mountain appeared
But before the hijacking.
before the hijacking,
When he was just a bystander at the shooting.
That's what
Wow.
that's what it appears, and we're working to confirm everything. But apparently was wearing the same outfit, looked the same, and we're sorting that out. We're working to turn that around.
Extraordinary.
And he actually gave us his name during the interview, which was the name Joseph Greer.
Wow.
And we now know it's 39-year-old Joseph Greer of Stone Mountain who is accused of that deadly bus hijacking.
Well, and what's interesting there is actually because you're a lawyer and I cover criminal justice, you have a gunman prior to a shooting, a murder, he's accused of murder now, and also taking a bus hostage. There was no premeditation because he gave a television interview at the scene of a shooting the same day. Someone who's intent on committing murder and taking a bus hostage isn't going to give that interview at the TV station. It really is going to speak to the lack of premeditation.
Well, Brendan, they say that premeditation doesn't have to take hours.
It could be seconds, right? No, absolutely. But I mean, what I'm saying is he didn't wake up that morning and say, I was going to take a bus hostage.
Yeah.
And I think that's fascinating, not from a criminal defense procedure standpoint, but it certainly is a mitigating factor of, I'm sure his defense is going to bring up at some point, we'll see how far this goes. But if you get into a trial situation or even a probable cause hearing to say, hey, look, I was defending myself, and I'm in no way arguing this on his behalf, but to say, hey, this guy pulled a gun on me and then I grabbed it and then I panicked.
And I killed, and I shot him.
That certainly for the murder charge.
For the murder charge,
could
I
be,
could see that, Brendan.
Could be self-defense, but then taking the bus hostage is going to be another very hard case for his defense attorney to make.
And we're going way ahead, getting way ahead of ourselves with the kind of criminal justice process. But I could absolutely, by what we're now learning, see us. If this presumably is going to go to trial. Presumably, we see most criminal defendants plead not guilty. If it goes to trial, I could absolutely see a split verdict there because, as we've learned, as you brought to our attention, the victim here apparently had a gun, and there was some sort of scuffle between him and the hijacking suspect.
Well, and his side of the story isn't going to be present either. The victim may have pulled the gun, and this is all hypothetical, okay? This is speculation, wild speculation. But the victim could have pulled the gun because the victim had a reasonable fear of imminent serious bodily injury or death and may have been trying to protect himself when he was disarmed and then shot and killed. But we can't get his side of the story because dead men tell no tales.
Yeah. But either way, once that gun has been pulled, then the person it's been pulled on has, arguably a reasonable fear of, serious bodily harm or death, like we've been talking about. So, that may be an issue in terms of criminal prosecution.
Yeah, and what's interesting, the gun charge is fascinating because people will say, well, wait, he didn't bring the gun on the bus. I'm not saying anyone's defending the suspect at this point.
No.
But let's say, hey, he didn't bring the gun on the bus. Why is he charged with this gun charge?
Because
the minute you possess that
That's
firearm
right.
and he's a felon, that's already a crime, even if he's taken it away from somebody. And then using that firearm in the commission of other felonies is itself its own charge and is an enhancement and is usually going to be sentenced to concurrent rather than consecutive. Sometimes, obviously it's the judge's discretion, but in most jurisdictions, a gun charge is a consecutive sentence on top of. But this gun charge is so minor compared to murder. If he's convicted of murder, the rest of it is really window dressing.
Well, I mean, here's the disconnect for me is, how do you go from defending yourself to then hijacking a bus?
Yeah, that's going to be the hardest thing to explain. And that how do you say that? And then, I mean, I guess there's a slippery slope there, but you and I would think would have acted very differently in the same scenario.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's interesting that he gave an interview with us, right? I mean, like minutes to hours before.
Yeah.
Well, it had to be minutes because we know the time. We're talking about less than 2 hours between the two incidents. So extraordinary when you think that we're interviewing a guy who's about to hijack a bus, or at least somebody now accused of that. Of course, innocent till proven guilty.
Yeah, and taking it to another level, the safety of our own staff and journalists is something that when I learned this that I thought about because I have to commend our company for taking great steps to keep us safe. I think no one knew that he was going to go on allegedly and hijack a bus with 17 innocent people. But it's kind of chilling to know that our staff was face to face with the person who did that, and
we meet the full range of people in society. I just a couple of years ago went to a man's house to interview him in his apartment alone because I do my own camera work. I'd run his background, but nothing came up because he had given me a fake name. Turned out he was a accused at the time, now convicted rapist and kidnapper, out on bail awaiting trial. And I was in his home to interview him about robocalls. I only found out later when I ran the address that I found his real name and found out he was on bail awaiting trial for rape and kidnapping, and I was alone in his apartment. I was alone in his bedroom because that's where his little office was, where he showed me the stuff on his computer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's chilling.
It is chilling.
That sometimes we're put in those situations, but I'll tell you, it's important to point out while we take every step, every precaution, we do often go to the scenes where violence has just occurred.
Yes.
The reason we do that is because on the ground, independent, objective reporting, fair reporting on the street, gathering the truth, gathering information is so vital to serving our communities that it's actually worth the risk. We mitigate the risks as much as possible, but it's worth the risk to do what we do because we believe it's a public service.
I want to let everyone know, Brendan, we've just learned that we were able to confirm that the interview is in fact with the suspected bus hijacker.
Wow.
And we are working to process that video and turn that around and show that to our viewers at any moment, as soon as we can, essentially. But again, I mean, like you said, I mean, it's chilling. Our journalists went out there and they were face to face with the person who now police say hijacked this bus and essentially terrorized several counties around Georgia and allegedly killed a person.
Yeah, there's so many surreal things in this incident. I was actually up at our assignment desk waiting to go on the air to talk about the downtown shooting when all of a sudden the assignment desk was jumping on this bus hijacking. I was listening to the scanner traffic. And again, scanner traffic is, in journalism, not a confirmation of anything. But it's what police are saying to each other and to dispatch in real time.
Yeah.
And so it is probative to what we do, with the caveat
It
that...
gives us leads.
Yeah, but with the caveat that it changes, right? And as you're trying to rack up that video of that interview, just talking about the surreality of that you had this bus hijacking, I heard them saying he has a gun to the head of the driver. He's saying that the driver has to do what he says or he's going to kill him. I heard that, within minutes of us finding out about the bus hijacking, and then seeing our helicopter video of ramming police cars, ramming civilian cars. That was with the bus driver at the controls, but the bus driver had no choice because the alternative is getting shot in the head.
Yeah, no.
It's absolutely chilling. One more thing I want to point out. Before we play this video, it's going to have no audio, by the way, because there is some profanity on it, but you're going to see the video here in a second. When you did see that police chase of the bus, how many Atlanta drivers were so great about getting out of the way? I've covered police chases in multiple cities, similarly sized like Houston. I was a helicopter reporter for 5 years there, covered many, many police chases. Never have seen such skilled defensive drivers, and part of it is driving in Atlanta is itself a contact sport, and we all have to learn how to drive defensively. They did an amazing job and avoided many collisions that could have been far worse. We might have been talking about many more injuries or fatalities had the drivers themselves not have done such an excellent job responding to this incident as it happened.
Okay, I want to play now this video of this interview. Actually, I think we're going to hold off. We're still
Yeah,
doing
that's
some
okay.
editing
You're watching
because
this in real time. It's important to point out. I love these live streams because you're watching the sausage get made. We're right now editing the video, making sure, and we say editing. We're not changing the context or meaning
we're
of
just
the video.
making sure you don't get F-bombed and
Yeah.
all the profanity.
We still have standards. Some other operations don't, but we do, and it's important to make sure that we're also, there's an incredible editorial review process that people don't think happens, and it does. It happens. It's happening right now. There's
and
a
one
team
thing-
of 20 people over there right now
And,
hammering this out.
and there are FCC regulations, and
Yeah.
we don't want to get fines, of course,
Yeah.
but we don't want to offend. And really, we understand that our viewers are all ages, that they're sometimes young
course.
children, and I also, it makes me recall the moment yesterday when we had to kind of pull our camera shot out with with our Atlanta News First chopper, because we weren't sure exactly if perhaps we were going to show someone who was dying, or show a bloody scene, and it's difficult, and I think that we try to filter out those things. I think, frankly, it can take an emotional toll sometimes on the crews preparing the news.
Yep.
But those are the things that we can't necessarily show you.
We do have some breaking news too. I don't mean to interrupt, to
Yeah,
say
go
that
ahead.
the reason I put my glasses on is I'm getting older, but I got to read the breaking news that we do now have the name of the victim from the bus, and this is the man from whom police say the gun was obtained. The person who originally pulled the gun, who is now dead and is considered the murder victim at this point by the authorities. His name is Ernest Byrd Jr., BYRD, and he was 58 years old. And we're obviously efforting more information about the victim and their identity at this point.
Condolences to his family. As I mentioned, we now do have that video of who we have now confirmed it was a suspect in the deadly hijacking through Gwinnett County, through multiple counties in Georgia yesterday. And again, just to recap, our Atlanta News First crews spoke with this man before the hijacking at the scene of the Peachtree Center mall shooting. We interviewed him, our crews interviewed him as just a witness, an average, what we call man on the street interview, not knowing what was going to happen. Let's go ahead and play that interview.
Yeah, Joy, this is pretty extraordinary to see this video. By the way, if you're not hearing the sound, it's because we have intentionally muted the audio at this point because we're reviewing some of the profanity that was there We just want to make sure it's up to our standards, but we wanted you to see the video raw as we did the interview.
Yeah, and again, just for our viewers, so this man, identified himself as Joseph Greer, and appears to be the same Joseph Greer that is the suspect in the bus hijacking. That is what we've been able to ascertain here at Atlanta News First. So again, this interview was conducted just a short time before the bus hijacking through several counties around Georgia. And this is who is believed to be 39-year-old Joseph Greer of Stone Mountain.
And what's extraordinary is he's at the scene of the first shooting. So there were two shootings that got national coverage and attention yesterday in the city of Atlanta and the Atlanta metro area. And the first one, this is the suspect in the second shooting before that shooting even occurred, interviewed about the first shooting because he was on the scene of it. You know, initially police said there was no connection between the two, and certainly from a causality standpoint that appears to be true. But what we have now is a definite connection between the two, in so much as the suspect in the second shooting was present for the first one.
So here's a newly released
fascinating
mugshot, released a short time ago. I mean, I should say hours ago at this point, but this morning. And this is the mugshot of who police say is 39-year-old Joseph Greer of Stone Mountain. And then you go back and look at our interview. You look at the shirt. Let me remove the graphic for a while. Look at the shirt. Look at the, it looks like either holes or dots on his right shoulder area. And you see the chain around his neck. You see the facial hair. And then let me play the video of our interview.
Yeah, I mean, he identifies himself
He identifies
by the same
himself.
name, and we've confirmed it's the same individual. It's just, and that was really good visual analysis there, Joy, to just sort of confirm that we're talking about the same person here. This is amazing. It's the suspect in the second shooting, present at the first one, interviewed by our cameras, and not know, maybe he didn't know, likely he didn't know what was about to happen, about how his day was going to change. He thought this was the worst thing that was going to happen to him that day. And now he's accused of murder. It's extraordinary.
And you almost wonder, and this is not in any way to excuse any of what happened, but you almost wonder how being at that Peachtree Center shooting might have affected his mental state.
It's a fascinating exploration that you just proposed, is that had the first shooting not occurred, would the second shooting have occurred? Because would he have been on that bus? Would he, I mean, there's a whole bunch of sort of happenstances, but then also his mindset. Hey, look, people go through traumatic events and it alters their mental state for sure, which is just amazing.
Yeah, no, it is. This is incredible. And so we're working to turn around some sound so you can actually hear. So you can actually hear that interview. But that is believed to be 39-year-old Joseph Greer of Stone Mountain, the suspect in the deadly bus hijacking that terrorized several counties yesterday. There were 17 people on board that bus. Joseph Greer of Stone Mountain is a convicted felon with 19 prior arrests, now facing multiple charges, including 1 count of murder, 1 count of hijacking a motor vehicle, 13 counts of aggravated assault, 14 counts of kidnapping, 2 gun possession charges as well. And, you know, I think just listening to the coverage yesterday, like Tracy Hutchins said, it's cliche, but she said it right. It's like a scene out of a movie. It's like,
It really is.
You know,
I've heard that so many times in my career too, when we get to scenes and people say it was like out of a movie, but we were all watching, but there were gasps in the newsroom as each impact occurred. By the way, that's where those aggravated assaults appear to have come from, because we'll have to look at the underlying explanation of each charge when it goes to a grand jury, what the argument is. We might also be able to see that in the arrest affidavit. When they file an arrest warrant, the officer often files an affidavit for arrest, and they'll give the underlying causality for those charges. But there's 2 ways you can get aggravated assault in this instance. Just pointing a gun at someone is aggravated assault in Georgia, and it's felony if you're pointing it at them in an illegal way. But also forcing someone to pilot a bus into other vehicles. A bus is considered a deadly weapon. A vehicle is considered a deadly
Absolutely.
weapon, and simply piloting that vehicle or causing another to do so you're in for a penny, in for a pound, as they say, right? And therefore that could be aggravated assault. The kidnapping, kidnapping a lot of times is misunderstood. People think it's about, literally taking a child. It's denying someone their freedom. This is of course, a paraphrase of the law, but it's denying someone their freedom, and there is no time minimum on that. 5 seconds holding someone against their will can be kidnapping in Georgia. And so merely holding those people on the bus, each one of those people could be an independent kidnapping charge.
That is an excellent point there, Brendan. And we've been showing that video without the sound, and we're working to basically just clear it so that we can let everyone listen to it and make sure that there's nothing offensive out there. And we also, I should say, when we're screening interviews, we also want to make sure that they're factually accurate. We don't just put people out there for the world to see if they're spewing lies. Opinion is one thing. We want to get witness accounts and opinion and so forth. But if they're basically trying to propagate misinformation, we fact check that and before we air it. But just looking back, because again, this is where we interviewed the suspect. The shooting scene. Let me just show folks the shooting scene at the Peachtree Center Mall, which was, when that news broke, I think the newsroom, as we do when breaking news happens, we kind of all, we're all on high gear, and the chaos erupted in the newsroom, and not because we're disorganized, quite the opposite, because everyone sort of, gets hard at work, goes to work trying to do their part, whether it's getting video or graphics or gathering new information. But here was the scene of the first incident of mall shooting, which injured 4 people, including the suspect. And this is the suspect in that shooting, 34-year-old Jeremy Malone from Morrow. And when that happened, I think we thought, wow, that's crazy. That's breaking news. And then it was just, really minutes later that the hijacking happened. So what a day it was. But what happened in the mall shooting was, that suspect who I showed you. Let me show you the mugshot again. This suspect who I've shown you here, that's 34-year-old Jeremy Malone, allegedly got into a fight with a 47-year-old man. Shot him. That's according to Georgia Bureau of Investigation and Atlanta Police. And officials say Malone continued. I apologize. I want to take you out now. We got to shift gears again. It's a very busy news day. There is a press conference happening about a bomb threat in downtown
very close to
Atlanta.
where the other shooting was.
Maria, I just want to make sure that I have the correct shot up.
It's right near Peachtree Center where the shooting happened yesterday.
I'm sorry.
While you're doing that, just stand by, folks. This is live television, if you will.
Sorry, guys. I'm just rerouting this. So this is the scene of a bomb threat in downtown Atlanta, and it looks like people have been evacuated now. We're getting ready for a press conference to begin at any moment now. Maybe they haven't been evacuated because I see some folks going in. At any rate, there are clearly some folks hanging out outside.
And this could just be a coincidence that this is so close. But yesterday, there were a lot of coincidences that stacked up. There was a woman who was on the bus who had been in the food court, and she had called 911. We found out from her family. And then you had the suspect in the second shooting was a witness to the first one, or at least a bystander whom we interviewed for here on Atlanta News First, which is just amazing that we interviewed the suspect in the murder and bus hijacking before the murder and bus hijacking at the scene of an earlier shooting. It's just a stunning series of coincidences, but look at everybody's day, the way it unfolded. The bystanders, the victims, all of those people, even the mayor, our news director, Kim Saxon, was talking about this morning. Like, what an extraordinary day the mayor of Atlanta had to go from, they started with actually talking about trying to stem the violence and how actually violence was down. And then we ended up with this extraordinary series of violent acts occurring in the city coincidentally after that. And the mayor was at every single one of those scenes leading the news conferences. It was an extraordinary day, certainly for the journalists involved, but the people of the city of Atlanta and Metro Atlanta who, were witnessing all of this, and some who were involved as well.
And Atlanta police are telling us that this is a bomb threat investigation. Again, it's a reported bomb threat at 230 Peachtree Street Northwest. And we don't have a lot of information. We're working to get more, but as you pointed out, Brendan, it is near 235 Peachtree Street where 4 people were shot. What a coincidence. So, obviously very concerning, and people who live in and work in that area have certainly had more than their fair share of trauma in the last 24 hours, needless to say. But this is being investigated. This, investigation is underway, according to Atlanta police. They say that they're assisting the Federal Protective Service in their investigation here. So we're waiting for remarks from them at any moment now. And obviously we're gonna bring up the volume as soon as there is anything really to hear, and bring you that whole thing live. But what a stunning 24 hours it has been. You've got this now new report of a bomb threat being investigated at 230 Peachtree Street Northwest in downtown Atlanta, and it's very near the scene of that really terrifying shooting. I mean, the first shooting yesterday at Peachtree Center Mall, which injured 4 people. And I want to just take everybody back as we're waiting for this press conference to begin to that scene from yesterday. So who you're looking at now, this is the suspect in that Peachtree Center Mall shooting. That was 34-year-old Jeremy Malone of Morrow. And here's the scene, a chaotic scene from that incident. And what investigators say happened was that the suspect, 34-year-old Jeremy Malone, again, got into a fight with a 47-year-old man at the food court and shot him, according to the Georgia investigation. And officials say that Malone then continued to walk through the court, shooting a 69-year-old woman from East Point and a 70-year-old woman from Atlanta. So two elderly women. And that is when an off-duty officer intervened and shot the suspect, according to police. So you have 4 individuals ending up shot, including the suspect. And all 4 were taken to local hospitals and are expected to survive. And that suspect, Jeremy Malone, is now in police custody. And what we've also learned is that suspect who opened fire was a convicted felon and had been arrested nearly a dozen times before. And now that suspect, Mr. Malone, is facing 5 new charges of aggravated assault, reckless conduct, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, possession of a firearm or knife during the commission of or attempt to commit certain felonies, and third-degree cruelty to children. That's according to Fulton County jail records that we have obtained. Because the incident was an officer-involved shooting, and what we also learned is, look at this video that we obtained as we were covering what happened at the food court shooting. We interviewed this man, who we have now learned went on to allegedly hijack a bus. So this man is 39-year-old Joseph Greer of Stone Mountain, and he is accused in the bus hijacking. So here's his mugshot, and you can see the same chain, you can see the same shirt with the kind of the holes, or maybe it's spots. Let's take a look. I'm just kind of doing a visual comparison. Maybe it's spots or hole. I'm not sure what that is on the right side. And you see that in the mugshot. You see the facial hair and all that. And so again, this is believed to be the same man. It's 39-year-old Joseph Greer of Stone Mountain, a convicted felon with 19 prior arrests, who then allegedly hijacked a bus leading to a high-speed chase. And this involved not only a Gwinnett County transit bus, it started in Atlanta, and it went through multiple counties, ended into Cobb County late yesterday afternoon. This is actually a brand new mugshot obtained just this morning. And then again, a short time ago, as we were going through some of our previous interviews from what happened at the mall shooting, we found this interview with the man who is now accused in the deadly hijacking. And let me show you some video of that hijacking, the bus hijacking. And yes, I see it does. Apologize. We have so many pieces of video here, so that looks like it is the mugshot again, but we're going to see some of the scene as well. And here you can see from traffic cameras. But that individual, Joseph Greer, convicted felon, 19 prior arrests. There you can see him being led away from the bus in handcuffs by authorities there. 17 people were on board the bus, including the driver, whom police called a hero in the aftermath. I want to get now to my colleague, Rachel Aragon. Rachel, okay, looks like Rachel
Am I cannot. That's where. Should I? Okay. Okay,
Yeah,
sounds good.
we can hear you, Rachel.
Hey,
Yeah,
Joy.
share with us
So
what
I'm just going to give you a little scene setter, I guess, right now. So we are at 230 Peachtree Street. The scene has just started clearing, but I just want to kind of show you what I'm seeing right now. All those people I just showed you guys right now are people who had to evacuate because they were inside 230 Peachtree Street. Many of these people I talked to were having to evacuate because they were inside. Some of them were tourists. Some of them were staying at Hotel Indigo at 230 Peachtree. Other people were waiting in line for their passport services. But again, the line is growing of people who want to get back to get their passport services all situated. We're also waiting for officials right now to speak about this. So you can see a podium right here. This is Atlanta police telling us the latest we're about to hear soon.
I apologize. I think we're just having a little bit of.
But yeah, just a lot of people evacuated. Many have said they had been impacted by both.
Sorry, guys. So we're just
Hear about what's happening from officials.
you see that we had our Rachel Aragon there near the scene of this bomb threat. Okay, looks like there's a press conference about to begin. There is a press conference about to begin. We are expecting that on this reported bomb threat in downtown Atlanta.
No, right this way. Sorry. It's all right.
Hang on now. Hang on.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not on the highway. So you're asking me Deja. One. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Give me 30 seconds. I can get a clock done.
Yeah, let's do that.
You're gonna make it look better. I need it.
Are you getting a light?
I have a
Go.
yeah. I got one light, but it's the sun.
Yeah.
It's the sun.
just talk a little louder.
Okay.
Oh yeah, what's up with the office? I kind of forgot about that whole thing. Got some other stuff going on. Thanks. It was breaking news.
No, you got his left. You got his left. His left shoulder.
Let's see. If I can swing in between you guys, just like right in the middle there.
No, this is Billy Hollywood Heath. Hey, you want to make you look good?
Oh, yeah, there we go.
That do it? Oh, sorry. There we go. Mind your shot now. Right now? I should be good. I should be good now.
All right, let's do this. All right.
Good afternoon. Captain Neil Welch with the Atlanta Police Department, Assistant Commander of Zone 5. Shortly after 10 a.m., the Federal Protective Service Police was contacted the Atlanta Police Department about a bomb threat they received here at 230 Peachtree Street. Atlanta PD responded to assist. At that point, an evacuation was conducted. Explosive detection K9 units from various jurisdictions responded to assist in sweeping the building. At this point, no threats or hazards have been located. The building is clear, and we have allowed for re-entry into the building. The Federal Protective Service Police is taking the lead on this investigation.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, appreciate it. Good job. No problem, Bill. How do you spell your first name?
N-E-I-L.
Can you grab my mic? A-N-L. A-N-L.
Welch, W-E-L.
Thank you, ma'am.
You come about to do
very
live?
much.
Yeah, Ben's about to answer something else
We don't
apparently
want to see
too,
you
off
again.
camera.
Okay.
See y'all like this.
Oh, you just think?
You're not rolling, right?
No, you're fine. Thank you.
I was like, you got it, you did it. Good job.
We just heard that update from officials that essentially that there is not any concern there after investigating reports of this bomb threat. They're not concerned, and it's such a big relief after the events of yesterday. That's our Rachel Aragon. It looks like her photographer
Four, yep.
is just kind of preparing for her live shot.
Test
So
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
She's
6.
doing mic checks. I'm going to get off of her because she clearly isn't aware that she's being broadcast. So I wouldn't want to be broadcast if I didn't know that I was being broadcast. So I'm going to pull off of her for a second. It looked like she was preparing to do her live report. We do have a noon show starting in just 2 minutes, which we also stream here on ANF Plus. So you'll be able to watch that on our traditional over-the-air broadcast or here. So she's probably preparing for that report, and that's why. So you can see her photographer centering her shots and all that. But the good news is apparently no concern after that reported bomb threat. That investigation happened at 230 Peachtree Street. And of course there was a lot of concern because it's very near that food court shooting that happened just yesterday at 235 Peachtree Street. And I should say Northwest, because we got a lot of Peachtree streets around Atlanta. But, remember that shooting, and I want to show you the scene, happened at 235 Peachtree Street. And so obviously a lot of tension, concern, trauma in that area, on that block. And, again, I do want to remind everyone, we learned as we were looking through our interviews from yesterday that we actually, this is the suspect in the Peachtree Center mall shooting that injured 4 people. But we learned that while our crews were gathering interviews and videos interviewed the man who later became the suspected hijacker, bus hijacker. So we're going to have much more on that coming up at noon on Atlanta News First and Atlanta News First Plus. Please download our free app if you haven't done so to get alerts sent right to your phone. Thanks for being with us.